Hello, this is PJ Bernay, and today's topic is WordPress safe? And I would say, after using WordPress since 2004, it is safe. It's very safe. But if you fall into one of these three categories, it's not safe. And it's not the fault of WordPress if you fall into one of these three categories. And why is this a big deal? Because I think a lot of people are not using WordPress because they are afraid, because they've heard it's unsafe. Somebody told them, oh, WordPress has been hacked, and maybe they've seen some headlines saying, such and such WordPress has a vulnerability. But it's really not true, because 99.99% of WordPress problems fall into one of these three categories, which I'm going to tell you in a second. But this came up just a few days ago. I was talking to someone at Amazon. I didn't sign an NDA, and I won't tell you too many details, but basically, Amazon uses WordPress internally, but they're too afraid to use WordPress externally. So they don't open WordPress to the public internet, which I think is ridiculous. And I think they're, if they want to be paranoid, that's up to them. But I think they got some bad advice. So what's the first category? The first category is shared hosting. So most of the headlines that you've seen in the past where all of these big hosting companies were hacked, it's because these companies had something called shared hosting, where thousands of users are sharing the same web server. And when you're doing that, you have thousands of customers sharing the same database. And historically, this has just not worked, because there's something called isolation. To get good security, you want to isolate you want to isolate your customers from each other so that they don't impact each other's businesses. And Linux has something called jailing. They've had this for decades, this concept of jailing. And there's different ways to jail your users from each other so that they can't get to each other. But as far as I can tell, it doesn't work perfectly. There's never a perfect jailing. There's no perfect jailing software as far as I can tell. However, the best way to jail your users is by isolating them on a completely separate server. And as far as I know, using a virtual machine is the best way to separate your customers. I would say, based on everything I've read, it's the most secure way to separate your customers and isolate them from each other. And this is how I do things. Now, if you go to a company like WP Engine, they used to have separate servers for all of their customers, but now, I guess to save money or whatever, budget cuts, they're back to shared hosting for their cheaper plans. So that's, if you go to WP Engine, you're running the risk. Maybe they just forgot that this is an unsafe way of doing business. And, I would say don't be a victim. Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe it'll be fine. But I think they're making a mistake by going back to shared hosting. So number one reason why people have problems is because they're using shared hosting. And so what's the threat there? We don't really know, because a lot of the details aren't really published after the fact, but we can assume somehow the hacker is able to get access to the database for all of the customers on that server, and then once they're into the database, then they can pretty much do whatever they want. And this is what happened to Media Temple back around 2004. Media Temple was the leader in WordPress hosting, and they They got hacked, not once, but 3 times. And they say no, it wasn't 3 times, but it was. They actually went in and they thought, okay, we'll just change everyone's database password and that will fix the problem. So they changed my database password without asking me, broke my software, and so then I had to fix it. And they said, okay, we've changed everyone's password, you should be safe now. Well, the hacker got in again. And then they changed all the passwords again, broke my software, I had to fix it again. And this happened 3 times. And then that was, at that point, I had enough of Media Temple. And that wasn't the only problem. They had a catastrophic disk failure before that. And the service was really slow. They had really great marketing, and they had really, that was why everyone went to Media Temple. They didn't really have a good service. It was just great marketing. So anyway, and that's the failure of Media Temple is really why now you have things like WP Engine and people like me that are selling WordPress hosting. It's because Media Temple basically failed to serve that market, and then people just started going off and creating their own services. So what's the number 2 problem? Passwords. Okay, and the third problem is opening up your WordPress to the general public. So when you're in your WordPress settings, there's a little checkbox that says allow the general public access. Sorry, my camera's moving. Allow the general public access to the server. And you don't want to check that box, because when you check that box, you're opening yourself for anyone in the world to just log into WordPress and create an account. And 99% of the time when you see a headline in the news, WordPress vulnerability found, quickly update your WordPress, it's because you didn't check that box. That is the reason. 99% of the time, that's why people are paranoid about upgrading WordPress, because you're allowing public logins. And I don't care. They can patch those holes, for the next million years. But why are you letting the general public into your WordPress? It's crazy. So WordPress that's the design flaw of WordPress. For some reason, when they created WordPress, they thought it was a good idea to allow random people to log in and then create an account and then blog on your blog, kind of like as a group blog where you can have multiple authors. But from a software development perspective, if you're a good developer, you would have thought, hey, that's just a really bad idea to put random complete strangers on the same system that the administrator is using. If they were going to do that, they should have, from the very beginning, created a completely separate interface for the general public that has very, very limited capabilities. But that's not how they did it. So now you're getting all of these headlines. Okay, new WordPress problem found, and then people send me these emails like, hey, we found a new WordPress problem. I'm telling them, oh, let me guess. It's because you're allowing the general public to log in to your WordPress, and 99.9% of the time, that's the problem. So, all right, so that's, if you uncheck that box and you only allow yourself to log into WordPress and you only use it for blogging for yourself, then you're not going to have any problems. And if you want to have other people blogging, what you can do is just create a separate blog for them that's completely separate, or you could just have them submit the articles to you and then publish them yourself. Or you could have maybe trusted editors that have been trained, some basic security precautions, and people that you trust, and then you don't have to worry about it. But okay, so that brings us to the password issue. There's different things you should consider with passwords. Obviously, you need a really hard password. You don't want a common password, and the common passwords are how people get in sometimes, where you pick something like SpongeBob123 and you think, oh, that's really original, because SpongeBob, I mean, who would think of using a cartoon character's name? But it turns out SpongeBob123 is one of the most common passwords. So, you know, if you think you're being clever, you're probably not. So you have to, you're going to have to, the best thing to do is just choose random letters and numbers and use a password manager to generate these random letters and numbers and symbols. And that way you don't have to worry about any hacker guessing your password. If you use a strong password, it's almost impossible for a hacker to get in there. So I don't even worry about hackers guessing my password. It's never happened. And here's the thing about WordPress is that it's not like somebody can just hook up a quantum computer and just try to guess your password a bazillion times. That's it's impossible, because every time the hacker guesses the password, it requires an HTTP request on the server. So after even guessing 100 passwords, the system is going to start to slow down. And this used to be a problem a few years ago. And what we just started blocking these people, or we just disabled that feature so that people can't guess the passwords. But it's not really a big deal, because guessing the most 100 common passwords, as long as you don't have a common password, you don't have to worry about these kinds of like little attacks. If someone was actually going to brute force your WordPress with some kind of a dictionary attack, it would take billions of years to guess, even simple passwords. So it's not going to happen, and unless somebody is like psychic or something, there's no way to guess your password. So here's the other password vulnerability. And this is giving out your password to people. You shouldn't give out your password to people that don't know what they're doing. For example, you give your password out to a graphic designer. I mean, that probably happens a lot. If your graphic designer doesn't have a VPN, there's a very high probability they're going to be hacked. Like, for example, your web designer is using maybe an apartment complex Wi-Fi, or maybe they're at Starbucks or something and they're not using a VPN. Someone could just be sniffing the packets on their laptop, and then your WordPress password would be exposed to hackers, and then they can get into your WordPress and cause problems. So I wouldn't trust your web designer. And what you could do is you can tell your web designer, hey, if you're going to access my blog, I want you to use a VPN. And if they don't know what a VPN is, probably you have a bad graphic designer. Just hire someone else, or I'll do it for you. I can design your website for you. And this happens. I've seen it happen where someone gives the graphic designer the password to something, and within minutes, hackers in there and destroying things. This is especially a problem when you're on vacation. I knew a guy, he was in Malaysia on vacation, and his password leaked out, and an entire gang of hackers posted his password on a Facebook group. These hackers had a Facebook group, and they they were all attacking his server at the same time. So if you're on vacation, I would say make sure you have a VPN and you're sure that your connection is secure. And yeah, I would probably connect that VPN to a country that you're relatively safe. It's not going to be hacked by somebody. Anyway, so what else can I say about passwords? Oh, okay, so if you give the graphic designer your password, let's say, the graphic designer says, oh, I need the password, and you give it to the graphic designer. This is what I do. I tell the graphic designer, give me a call when you're done so that I can change the password, because I don't want you to have the password to my server. So, that works. You just say they'll contact you when they're finished working, and then you can change the password. That way nobody has the password except for you. Another thing is, if you have a good system administrator, like if you're working with me and I give your graphic designer the password, I will do that for you. I will disable their access when they're done working. And like I said before, I have a way to jail that graphic designer into only editing the files that they need to edit. Of course, that's not perfect. If your graphic designer is really sneaky and they wanted to do something to you, they could just install it into the theme files, and then you would be stuck. And I've never seen that happen. Usually, most graphic designers, I'm not saying that they're bad people or anything, but better be safe than sorry. You don't really know. You don't necessarily know. Maybe the graphic designer has, someone in the family that's, doing something. So you never know. I would just say limit the number of people that have your password. And if you're working with me, what you can do is you can just tell the graphic designer, hey, just email the changes or the files, just email them to my system administrator. He'll install them for you free of charge. And you don't even have to bother with it. Just send him the files. He'll install it for you. And that saves everyone time. And then I feel safer that I don't have to give access to somebody that I don't know, someone that I don't trust. And I would say that's a good solution. So WordPress really is very safe, in my opinion. And I've been doing this for decades. I started doing the stuff in the 90s, and I can tell you WordPress is really safe. Most problems, the majority of problems, fall into one of those three categories. So, however, the last thing I want to say about this is backups. If you have really good backups, if you keep your own backups, you don't have to worry so much about getting hacked, because you'll be able to sleep at night knowing, hey, I have an extra copy of everything. So even if the most clever hacker in the world gets in your system and destroys everything, you still have a backup. So, it's not that big of a deal. And I'll do a whole separate video about backups and backing up WordPress and why, of course your web hosting company is going to say, oh yeah, we have backups for sure. But I can tell you from experience, a lot of these companies, a lot of these web hosting companies have thousands of customers, many thousands of customers. And so when something breaks, they don't have time to fix, thousands of people's problems. They don't have time to restore thousands of backups. It's just not going to happen. So I would be really surprised if, when there's a catastrophic failure, there's a hacker that gets into things. I'm not even expecting, because I've been through this so many times, I'm not even expecting the service provider to have my backups. Or, I mean, if they do have backups and they're able to restore things, great, but do not expect that to happen, because it's very unlikely. So you want to keep your own backups completely separate from whatever company you're trusting with your files. And I would say, if you're working with me, I keep 3 backups of everything. But don't even trust me. I'll give you an extra copy of the backups so that if I get hit by a bus or something, or something happens and I'm not able to restore your files, very, very unlikely. But anything can happen. There's tornadoes, hurricanes, just the weirdest things do happen. So always just keep some backups of everything. And if your business is getting bigger and you have thousands and thousands of posts, it becomes an issue where, if you're posting every single day, it becomes a little bit tedious to make backups for yourself every single day. I automate backups every day, every night, and I can increase the frequency of these backups. I can create backups of backups of backups of backups. I mean, it just depends how much you're willing to spend. I include 2 or 3 backups with my basic standard plans. But I mean, if you want to go super paranoid and back up multiple times a day, I'm happy to do that with you. But generally speaking, I would say, if you just if you're a blogger and you don't have thousands and thousands of posts, like if you're not putting out multiple posts per day, I would say it's pretty safe to just back up maybe once a week. But it really just depends on what you're doing and what your needs are. So it's actually getting really hot in this car, so that's all I got.